morning, everyone. Welcome to Silicon Valley Clean Energy Executive Committee meeting, April 28th at 10 a.m. I welcome you all, and I'd like to call the meeting to order. And Andrea, can you help us with the roll call and all the other protocol regarding the hybrid meeting?
Yes, thank you. So I would like to note that participating today in person, we have Chair Walia. And thank you, Vice Chair Makacha.
Present.
Thank you. Participating remotely, Director Martinez-Beltran. I'll skip to Director Rennie.
Here.
Thank you, Director Martinez-Beltran, if you would mind unmuting. I don't believe she can hear us currently, but we see her present. But I did want to note that unfortunately, Director Tyson was not able to join us and notice his location. He is en route. However, he is in our public. So during public comment period, he may get an opportunity to speak. With that, we do have a quorum of this committee.
Thank you. I would like to call for public comment on matters that are not listed on the agenda.
I see no hands raised.
Okay, wonderful. Let's move on to the consent calendar. There's an action item to approve minutes of the March 24th Executive Committee meeting. Is there any comment, discussion, or I'll get public comment and then come back for a motion? No hand raised from the committee. Open it up for public comment.
No hands raised, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. Close public comment period. Bring it back to the committee. Do I have a motion?
You have a motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Brian. Do I have a second? Rob, are you on or online? I need a second for the meeting minutes from last meeting.
I wasn't at the last meeting, so I wasn't going to make the motion, but if you want, I'll second it.
I can second it in that case, Rob. I was at the meeting, so I'll second Brian's motion. And can we have votes, please? Probably need roll.
Yes, please, thank you. Chair Walia.
Aye.
Vice Chair Makacha.
Aye.
Director Rennie.
Aye.
Director Martinez-Beltran.
Aye.
Thank you. That motion carries.
Wonderful. We'll move on to the regular calendar and starting with item number 2, which is a CEO update and our CEO Girish Balachandran will be giving a report.
Thank you, Chair Walia. I'll be talking about 2 items, and I have staff to help me out with this. Both these items, I'd say, are ones with a lot of uncertainty of I don't know. I'll just start with, and we don't know. But they both, I think, would be of interest to all of you. One is this concept called income graduated fixed charge. And a law was passed last year, which was through the budget trailer bill, which asked the CPUC to develop an income graduated fixed charge to be implemented by July 2024. So the first part of that process has been initiated. I believe there's been some press on it. And we will be, through our trade association, SVCE, intervening in that case. And one of the points we're going to be bringing up is to not have the generation portion of the rate, that is SVCE's rate, be subject to the income graduated charge. So those are the comments we'll make. The policy issue that drove this is around decarbonization. So the thinking was, if you have a fixed charge that is graduated, you would basically have a lower volumetric charge, which means the cost of electric appliances would be less. So it basically promotes more electrification and therefore decarbonization. So that's the thinking behind it. So that's item 1. Item 2, we don't know yet all the details, but it's the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the California Restaurant Association's suit against the City of Berkeley's gas ban. So our staff are monitoring the situation. There's a lot of, we don't know yet. We're working with the Building Decarbonization Coalition. They will be looking at doing some legal, they are undertaking some legal analysis, see how this would impact cities that have undertaken REACH codes. Gas ban is different than how most of our cities have undertaken REACH codes, but the language in the order is broad enough that we need to do some analysis. And so we are working with our member agencies, keeping the board and alternates updated on our state of unknowing at this point. Also with the city managers, building officials, and the member agency working group. So we will be leaning into doing as much as we can, not just of monitoring, but to support our mission of decarbonization. So those are the two items I had to give you an update on, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Girish. As you mentioned, both have been getting enough press coverage that residents are concerned and looking good. As you said, the REACH codes impact each city differently. I do appreciate your email sent to the full board, yes, getting us where we are. For each one of us is capturing some information from this media, more details elsewhere. The income graduated fixed charge has been an issue. I'm hearing from some residents about it, and it's the unknown that makes people even more concerned. With that, any questions of Girish? I'll just take clarifying questions and then I'll open public comment and comments afterwards. Committee members, any clarifying questions? Being none?
Director.
Oh, his hand is up. Thanks, Ben. Rob.
It could have been after public comment, but on the income graduated, the piece that the increase in the fixed piece seems like it also is getting people with solar to maybe pay a little more of their fair share on the distribution side of it. People that have solar may have very low monthly rates and are effectively getting subsidized by others, but you didn't mention that. Is my thinking correct that it's actually, I don't know if you want to call it correcting that problem, because those that own solar don't want it corrected, but.
Director Rennie, I don't know the answer to that question. In preparing for this meeting, we talked about that being a concern, so we've flagged it as something we will be following up on. And so I'd be happy to, if I have some facts on it after the meeting, I'll share it with the executive committee on how this may affect NEM 2.0 and NEM 3.0 customers, if there's any difference in that. At this point, we don't know. At least I don't know, but we'll get back to you.
Okay, and sounds like we're sort of taking a position against part of it, and I don't know what position we'd want to take on that portion of it. Again, you know, worried about the idea that if solar customers, which tend to be people with money, get subsidized, it means those with less money that can't afford solar ends up paying higher rates. And this higher fixed charge may make that less of an issue.
Yeah, so we'll keep you updated on this. It's a bit of a long process. One other point I just alluded to a little bit is how this came about to be a law. But this, in my opinion, is a major policy shift, but it didn't go through all the committees in the legislature. It was passed through a budget trailer bill. So it kind of, and similar to what Benno will be talking about in the next item of 1373, it started off as a budget trailer bill and it was so policy laden, became a bill. AB 205 just went through. So it's a little bit of a stealth policy kind of deal. So not the best way to make policy. So that's something else that you just flagged that we'll be bringing up with legislators.
Thank you, Girish. Rob, do you have more questions? Okay, thanks for always bringing up unique perspectives, and this demonstrates yet again how very complex this industry is. And so many stakeholders, any change at one end can impact CCAs and the customers served. And you had a question?
Oh, I have a ton of questions. This is, I'm just shocked by this. So who's behind the trailer bill? The PG&E, SoCal Edison? Who's pushing this?
It's done already. So this is a law. This is law now. So you're asking who pushed it last year?
Yes.
I don't have the answer to that. I'm gonna ask Sitlali. Oh, sorry, Bennett.
The governor really pushed AB 205 last year, and it was a large bill, so it had many other components to it as well, like the strategic reliability reserve.
And our position, our advocacy group or lobbyist, they are saying on our behalf that generation should be excluded.
Yes.
Why?
One is you need to send some pricing, right, to customers, and it needs to be, the energy charge should still be allowed to send some pricing. I think the balance over here, staff, feel free to pitch in and help me out with this. In the old days when we did time of years, there was energy efficiency being one of the goals, right? So that's where energy charges helps with energy efficiency, so the higher the energy rate. But this helps with decarbonization and electrification policy objective. So California's policy objective for the last 40 years has been energy efficiency. It changed now to its efficiency plus electrification. So as far as the generation rate, it's something that our boards control. And so that's one, from a local jurisdictional standpoint, we want our boards to control what the generation rate is and not have the PUC. I'm gonna ask if either Benna or Sitlali has some additional. There you are, Sitlali.
Yes, so that's what Girish was referring to in terms of the rate autonomy is one of the reasons why we've been arguing for the generation component to not be included in the fixed charge. But also the law has only required the IOUs to adopt this income graduated fixed charge, and generation costs vary as the energy market varies over time, and so the costs aren't fixed. And of course, there's the fact that we don't want the CPUC looking at how we set our generation rate, because if any component of the generation rate were to become fixed in any way, that would necessitate the CPUC looking at our contracts, looking at how we set our rates, and possibly telling us exactly what we would need to do when setting our rates. So it really would infringe on our rate autonomy, and that's really the high-level focus of our arguments against including that rate component in the fixed charge.
Thank you. So Brent, let's take another question, and I want to move along with
You
public
can
comment.
move it along.
Okay, great. Great issue, big problem. I'm not sure we can solve it. Unfortunately, as Girish pointed out, it was part of the trailer bill.
And we'll keep you updated.
A lot of things for the board to consider. Okay, I'd like to open the public comment period for the CEO's update. Andre?
No hands raised, Chair.
A comment from our board chair. I know he's a member of the public. Hi, George.
I've allowed him to speak if he would like to make any comments. I don't think so.
Thank you. I'll close the public comment period and bring it back to the committee. Any comments or more clarifying questions or CEO? Yvonne, I haven't heard from you yet. Two problems, so maybe we just hold off. Figure out where we go. Okay, wonderful. Rob, any thoughts from you? Right.
No, but I'd like to hear how this moves along and if there's anything that I can do to help to support this, let me know because I think this is a bad thing, not a good thing.
Which one are you talking about, the Ninth Circuit or the IG, or the?
Well, so no, the income
Yeah,
graduate.
yeah. I
Fixed
thought we
charges.
moved on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Not sure.
I appreciate Girish will keep us
Yeah.
updated
Yeah.
on that.
All
And-
done.
I agree, Brian. It is a problem for most people. And the Ninth Circuit also, it's in the news and let's see, we are waiting and watching. And you were very clear, it impacts different cities differently. And I appreciate the SVCE team working with, especially while Zoe.
I'll just leave it one last thing. It's restating your last point. We will be of support to all of you individually, and we're working with our general counsel also to figure out what additional support we can provide each city in terms of legal resources that you can utilize to do the analysis for your city. So we're really all in on this, part of our mission. So keep you updated on that.
Thank you.
Chair Walia. Chair Walia.
It is Yvonne Howard. I think she's having some technical difficulties.
Do you want to try again? You're mute.
Can you hear me now?
With an echo, we can hear you a couple of times.
How about now? Is it better? Okay. I just wanted to that, Grish, you know what? I still hear this echo. I'll put some stuff in the chat. If that's,
No, we do not have chat enabled.
we don't. I'll call them back in. I'm not getting a good connection.
Okay, Yvonne, we'll move on. Thank you. We will be working on this, as Girish pointed out, in upcoming board meetings on the issues, and Girish also said we will be kept posted. Okay, moving on to item number 3, which is yet another budget trailer bill. It's an update on budget trailer bill and AB 1373. And the report is going to be presented by Bennett Chang, Senior Government Affairs Manager. And it's yours.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. So I'm here today to talk about our top legislative priority, which is the budget trailer bill and AB 1373. Since this is a Brown active committee, I'm not going to get into too many details on the strategy and tactics today, but really wanted to give the executive committee an update about what has been going on. So as a quick reminder, the governor proposed earlier this year a budget trailer bill that contains a lot of energy policies. Recently, Assemblymember Garcia, who is the chair of the Assembly Energy Committee, also introduced AB 1373. The bill contains a lot of the major provisions in the governor's trailer bill. There are some minor differences, but wanted to walk you through some of the major provisions today. So number 1, as central procurement. So both proposals would allow the CPUC to direct either IOUs or the Department of Water Resources at the state level to centrally procure resources. Right now, there's a challenge in that the language is written in a very broad way. It just says it's diverse, clean energy resources. Doesn't give any detail for what that is. There's really no guardrails to make sure that that authority is limited. Secondly, both of the proposals has very broad expansion of the CPU's authority over CCAs in relationship to the integrated resource plans. We think this kind of infringes on CCA board governance and is a concern. And then finally, both proposals propose a capacity payment that is on top of what the CPUC already charges and penalizes for resource adequacy deficiencies and any CAISO backstop procurement that needs to happen. when any particular load serving entity is short on energy. So we think that this particular capacity payment proposal doesn't change behavior because we're in a very tight resource adequacy market right now. And rather, it really just impacts affordability for customers. So your packet for today's meeting included CalCC's official oppose unless amended letter, which outlines a lot of our concerns and suggested amendments that we're working on with CalCCA. So on Wednesday, the Assembly Energy Committee actually heard AB 1373, and they passed the bill on a 9-2-3 vote. We were expecting this to happen because the chair of the committee is the author of this particular bill. But I would say that there was really good discussion during the committee about these three key provisions and some of the problems with it. So I am hopeful that there'll be an opportunity to continue to refine the proposal, especially in the ways that we've been advocating for through CalCCA. So this is a very confusing process because we have two legislative vehicles, budget trailer bill and also AB 1373. So the Senate is really considering this as a budget item. It's going through the budget committee process. So we will continue to have conversations with senators in relationship to that budget process. At the same time, this bill is going through policy committee. So it's very confusing here, a little bit messy, but happy to answer any questions that you guys might have on the process. So finally, wanted to share at a very high level some of the activities we've been doing on both of these proposals. We're working very closely with CalCCA on developing both the strategy as well as the policy in response to the proposals. We're continuing to have conversations as SVCE, our partner CCAs are, CalCCA is as well with policymakers. And then we'll continue to keep the board informed as this process happens. But just wanted to thank the board members who have volunteered to help us with the advocacy piece. I really, really appreciate that. That will make a difference.
Thank you, Benna. Thank you for bringing it to our attention. The way I look at it, both the budget trailer bill as well as AB 1373 are causing more complexity and more problem and taking control away from the CCA board governance and all concerns. Good to know you are working on this, following up. I especially appreciate the letter sent by CalCCA on this matter. Questions, committee members? Let's start with Rob and then Yuan. No questions, Yuan? Questions?
I don't have a question. He told me how to do this.
Director Martinez-Patron, you might be logged in on two devices. If you could mute one of them.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So thank God for technical support. I didn't have a question yet. I had more of a comment. If you want, I'll hold it.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, Yvonne. Brian? Let's open the public comment period.
No hands raised.
I close the public comment period, bring it back to the committee. We'll start with Yuan. Yuan?
Thanks. We have ledge committee, but I wanted to also know if, will we be sharing, what are our suggestions going to be for this and for the greater board and kind of where we're going, what, not just SVCE, but of course, CalCCA. So that's really, what I wanted to make sure that we get to everybody as well, so that they're informed and they know what asks are being made and what's happening.
Absolutely, that's a great point. The CalCCA letter starts to talk about those issues on a high level. So I would say, to summarize it, it's really about narrowing that very broad language in the bill. So for example, on central procurement, it's not just any diverse clean energy resource, but it's for those really hard for individual load serving entities to procure kind of resources like offshore wind, potentially geothermal from the Salton Sea. And so CalCCA has proposed some amendments to, again, tighten that up, put in guardrails. What the committee talked about a sunset for that procurement authority as well. So these are ways of just providing assurances and direction really from the legislature to this potential entity about what kind of resources are appropriate to procure here. Same, I would say, for the CPUC authority, it's really narrowing that very broad language that's in there right now to provide, again, some assurance that they're not infringing on our governance model. And the capacity payment, I would say, is an ongoing negotiation. But I think what's landing in the legislature is really this idea that double penalizing folks is not going to help solve the issue, and again, leads to affordability impacts for our customers.
I think Yvonne's muted. She said, thanks. So thank you, Benna. Any other comments? You don't, there's not an action item, right? Okay, there's an update. So thank you, Benna. Thank you for all the good work. And again, complexities where the state via CPUC is making things more. The intent is good, the policy goal is good. Discussion upfront before saying laws is a better way to deal with policy issues. Here we are today, kind of a reverse process, but we are all hoping to learn and improve. Let's move on to item number 4. And that is a recommendation to authorize a request for extension to comply with load management standards. It's an action item, something typically does not come to the board. Focus more on policy issues, but staff is going to inform us why it is in front of us. And the staff person speaking is Adam Sullivan, Director of Energy Services and Community Relations, and Sitlali Sandoval, Senior Regulatory Advisor. So, who's going to start?
I will start. So this is an administrative item, would normally not be brought to the board or the executive committee. However, LCCA recommended the board that we board approval to request an extension around wellness or load management standards deliverable plans. So as part of MIDAS, which is the Market Informed Demand Automation Server, MIDAS database, all large IOUs and CCAs are required to populate MIDAS with time-dependent rates. So just as a reminder, MIDAS is part of the conversation around surrounding the next generation time of use rates, real-time rates. Database designed to enable demand reduction, primarily aimed at end-use equipment manufacturers and other demand-side management layers. Lali will now provide more background on it.
Thank you, Adam. Okay, so the load management standards, the actual regulation is quite intricate and has a series of compliance obligations for us that start this summer and end in the summer of 2027. And the one thing to note is that all of these compliance obligations are interrelated. However, the focus of today's discussion will be only on the July 1st, 2023 obligation, which is circled in green. And that is the requirement to upload, as Adam was saying, time-dependent rates into MIDAS. So I'm going to explain on the next slide why meeting that deadline is not possible. Next slide, please. Thank you. So there's been a lot of regulatory work that has happened in the preceding months. We've been part of a working group along with all of the other load serving entities in California, working very, very closely with the California Energy Commission staff on figuring out exactly how to meet the July 1st, 2023 deadline and sort through the very detailed and complex implementation issues that we're facing. Unfortunately, it is now essentially May, and the protocols for communicating directly to the MIDAS database haven't been finalized yet, which is obviously a huge issue because we need those protocols in order to automatically communicate with the server. The second issue is that there's disagreement about how exactly to compile rates because as I'm sure the execcom is aware, we're responsible just for our generation rate, which is one component of the customer's bill, and the investor-owned utilities are responsible for the transmission and distribution rate components. And there's disagreement in terms of who is uploading what and whether we need to combine our generation rates with the T&D rates before uploading into MIDAS, or whether those rates can be compiled after the fact. So those are the two issues that are outstanding at the moment. And I just want to discuss the non-compliance scenario. So we are recommending that the executive committee recommend to the board to approve authorization for us to seek an extension because non-compliance would result in a complaint being filed by the CEC's executive director or the CEC seeking injunctive relief. Next slide, please. So again, the recommendation here is to authorize a request for extension to comply with the load management standards. As I mentioned on the previous slide, we've been working with other load serving entities in California, and all of the investor-owned utilities and CCAs have agreed that the 7/1 deadline cannot be met and must be amended or extended. So we're going with a dual strategy, and we have signed on to a joint letter because we thought that it would be strategically more beneficial for the CEC to hear from all of the load serving entities that are facing the same issue, not just an individual CCA. So we've signed on to this letter that is expected to be issued hopefully today. If not today, then by the end of the week, which requests an extension. And what could happen is that the CEC could receive the letter and decide to issue an extension on their own. If that happens, then board approval may not be necessary for us to individually seek an extension. However, if that does not happen, then we would need to seek board approval for the extension, which is why we're coming to the executive committee as a precautionary measure today to prepare ourselves and kind of do some of the preparation ahead of time. Any questions?
Thanks, Girish. I'm going to turn to you. Would you like to add something?
Yeah, just part of the request is, as you said, Chair Wally at the beginning of the meeting, this is something we typically wouldn't bring to you as an administrative issue. But due to what the CEC and CALC, that's why we bring it to you. We would love to put this on consent calendar if you agree with this recommendation.
Okay, thank you, Girish. And it also highlights how very complex this industry is and all. It's almost like a web in my mind, the operations that by BS.
Chair, I have a quick question.
Go ahead, Jiva.
Nothing controversial. I'm just curious, but is the the IOUs and the CCAs, is it about who is taking responsibility for what charges or how the charges are shown? I mean, it just seems that we would want to have what we're charging for the rates and then separately what they're charging for the infrastructure. But I'm just curious if that is playing a factor in this.
So everyone is supportive of what's happening here. And we're to support it. We want to make sure that the right signal gets to the market at the right time. And if we're taking on accountability for transmission pricing and vice versa, right, or any other CCA is doing the same, then chances of that being less than perfect are significant.
Yes.
But it's just having control with the right players. I think The current solution is to have some sort of additive function or maybe a third party finding some of these things. But just make sure the right price gets up with.
Yes, so the issue is with who is uploading what. As Adam was saying, we don't want the wrong signals or confusion to the wrong things to be uploaded to Midas.
Does it
Thank
answer
you.
your question, Yuval? Wonderful, great. Rob, questions from you? Okay, let's open the public comment period.
From hands raised, Chair.
No. Close the public comment period, bring it back to the committee for comments, discussion, motion, action item.
So the alternatives that we're facing are either don't put it on consent, put it on consent, or put it as a discussion item. For the
Correct. So
board.
It's not a consent.
Or the board meeting,
Correct.
oh,
Yeah, but there, this is an action we need to take
recommend.
today.
Correct.
Yes.
So I'll make a comment. I don't want to interrupt you, Brian.
That's okay, go ahead.
I'm in favor of putting it on consent. I think that, staff has done what seems like this is something routine that they deal with, and we're just having this hiccup. I don't hear any alarms that they think there won't be success, a high degree of that we won't be successful in getting the extension, or that we will have significant financial impact. So with that, I mean, I'm content putting it on consent. And I'm happy to make that motion if needed.
Perfect. That's what I was going to say. I'll take it as a motion.
Great.
Rob, any comments from you?
I'm willing to support the motion. I didn't hear anything, staff, I think, gave a good report of it. At first I had some questions, but then by the time they got through, I really did not. And I don't know what else to ask about. I was waiting to hear if anybody else brought something up I missed, but so far, no. So I'm willing to second the motion.
Wonderful. Any other thoughts, Brian, or should I just call for a vote?
We have a motion and a second.
Wonderful. Let's have a vote, please.
I will start with you, Chair Walia,
Aye.
Vice Chair Makachuk,
Aye.
Director Rennie,
Aye.
Director Martinez Beltran.
Aye.
That motion carries.
Thank you. With that, we to item number 5, which is an informational on the item. It is enterprise risk management framework question item, and Amrit Singh, our CFO and for finance and administration. The report.
Great, thank you, Chair. So obviously, the previous discussions highlight all the risk we face, some of the risk we face, right? It goes beyond energy. We often talk about risk management, the framework of energy management. We have an energy risk management policy, but how do we comprehensively as an organization assess all the risks we face as an not just market driven risk, but regulatory, reputational, business continuity. So we're introducing a framework, we're calling it an enterprise risk management framework, and the emphasis on the word framework. So right now, this is a framework, and as a team, as a management team, actually as an agency, we are still developing the elements of it while working within this framework. Meeting actually this afternoon as a management team, further define the elements of this framework. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about that framework. I'll talk a little bit about a timeline of how we assess risk in the agency. I'll tie it to last year's stress test analysis, and this is also this year's analysis is next on the agenda, so it's kind of related to these two items are related. And I'll talk about a little bit of a distinction between what we mean by ERM and stress test. Last year we did stress test. This year we're expanding it to ERM. I'll talk about the components of the ERM. Risk matrix, how we assess, quantify, or evaluate risk, the risk register, and the stress test, which is an important component of ERM. Okay, so here is our timeline. So what we did this year as an agency, very beginning of the year, we basically went throughout all of the departments in the organization, and as staff, we engaged in discussions as what are some of the strategic risks facing the agencies, all the various areas that we deal with. And we took that and put it into an ERM framework, which I'm going to talk about. We had discussions of this framework with the Finance Committee meeting in February. And there was a very brief introduction to this at the risk oversight committee. And also today, so I'm going to present the framework to the committee here. We're going to talk about stress tests at the next item. Then the stress test actually, which is a component of ERM, we'll talk again with the Finance Committee meeting in May. Then we'll present it like last year to the board in June, and that basically shapes how we update our reserves policy and the level of reserves we should target so that we can withstand the risks that we're facing. Yeah.
Question, and forgive me, I don't have the strategic goals in front of me, that report, but is this one of the items on our strategic plan to do this analysis or to do this?
Yes, strategic plans very much alike.
Yeah, that's what I thought, but it is it a line item in there?
Goals 15 and 16 tied to this, right?
Yeah. Very good.
Oh, wow.
Looking at someone read this stuff.
Well, the staff report is very well done. So thank you for that help.
Okay.
Yeah, risk management is part of our strategic goals, and what we're doing is, as an agency, as we're maturing, we're basically further developing elements of our risk management.
Tightening it up.
Yes.
Okay. I just think that's a key point to make as a bullet point. This is part of what SVCE set out to do, and you're stroking it off the list or executing against that.
Yeah, if I may just add to this, we have kind of a parallel process of the strategic plan, strategic focus areas, and the budget. We kind of go through this March, and he's starting the March today. The March ends in September of each year. Just updating, so you see the budget, you see the strategic focus areas, so you're exactly right. They're all kind of intertwined. And Amrit and the team are taking it to the next level by really doing some very good analysis and looking out 5 years.
Okay, so
I'm very supportive of this. This is my point, I guess.
So tying a little bit to what we did last year. Last year, we focused on stress tests, which is very financially driven, more about our power procurement portfolio, which is the biggest risk we face. But we expanded towards an enterprise risk management framework. But the fifth risk that's listed there, threat to public services and facilities, which was a closed agenda item. We expanded into other areas, and now we are more comprehensively assessing risk that goes beyond even those into this framework. And a little bit of tying of what stress test is and what ERM is. So as I said, ERM is a more comprehensive, the emphasis on the word enterprise, organization-wide. It's a disciplined approach to making sure that we can achieve our objectives efficiently and effectively, and we don't get derailed by risks because we're appropriately upfront. And some of those risks are legislative, regulatory, kind of things we talked about earlier in the meeting. Stress test is a very important component of ERM, so now it's a component of ERM. The stress test is very, so here we look at a lot of words there, but we say interrelatedness of risk. One of the frameworks I'll talk about in the next slide is a risk register. It's a risk register. We basically identify all the risk drivers or risk factors, risk events, right? These are the elements. The stress test is kind of saying, what are some plausible scenarios? Obviously, we can't manufacture a stress test that says every risk happens all at once. But what are some of the credible scenarios that are maybe extreme but plausible? Things we have seen in the past materialize. right? So combination of those risk drivers that define a stress test is very relevant for a commodity traded portfolio. If you remember in the news, when Silicon Valley Bank failed, one of the big criticisms for the bank was they didn't do adequate stress testing and for interest rate risk. And let me just say, interest rate is a volatile commodity instrument, but commodities are orders of magnitude much more, the business we're in. So we have to do, even though we do standard risk metrics in our monthly, weekly monitoring of portfolio risks, but this is like things that standard risk metrics is not gonna predict. It's not gonna predict an economic recession happening. It's not gonna predict the banking scenario, the Fed raising interest rates. So it's similar to that, some disruptions that can happen in the marketplace. And we've seen these disruptions in commodity markets, and I'll talk about that in the next item. So that's the stress test. Now it's a component of ERM. Okay. Next slide, we'll go through very briefly the key components of ERM. So what is a risk matrix? And I don't intend you to see the small pictures on the right, and I'll go through that in the detail slides. But risk matrix, in other words, a risk rubric. How do we assess and quantify or rank risks, more importantly, so that our focus as an organization is not something that's right in front of us and we're putting all our resources on that, but we have strategically, comprehensively thought about risk and mitigate those that rank higher. And this matrix is something that we as an organization will evolve and shape it. What I'm presenting today is to get our discussions going, but as we gain experience as a team, we'll say, this will be more informative and we will shape that. It has to have meaning within the management team and within the organization, more so than just what's printed on paper. So basically, it's going to assess things like what's the likelihood of a risk materializing, and if the risk were to materialize, what's the consequence on the organization? Okay, and then the other big component is a risk register. It's a record of organizational risk, the risk that we have identified, who the owner is, what mitigations we have in place, what are some of the additional plan mitigations. And then using the risk matrix, we say, even with the plan mitigations, what the residual risk will be. This is sort of defining a risk tolerance level. Risk, we cannot really 100% eliminate it. We manage it and cannot, put all resources to it's not cost effective to just get rid of it. It's not possible. So you have to define and accept a level of risk. That's using the first two components there. That's how we come up with that. And the stress test, I talked about it, and we're going to talk about it in the Okay, so a little bit about the risk matrix. So here you can see a little bit on bigger screen now. So on the y-axis, we have the frequency of likelihood. And again, these are categories we're starting to have discussions with, but we may shape it to something that's more meaningful to us. It says, this is a very rare event. This is unlikely, but still plausible, or very likely. We know this is going to happen. And if it were to happen, what is the impact and consequence on the organization to carry out its mission or on our financial viability and the reserves that we have? So we assess the likelihood, consequence, as I said, when we use it along with a risk register, it defines what the residual risk is, or what the risk tolerance level is for the organization. And when we align as a management team, we have a common vocabulary, common understanding, presented to the committees and the board, their shared understanding of the risks and our acceptance of the decision. Any questions so far on the matrix? Okay, another slide. Okay, this is the components of the risk register. So our first, again, as I mentioned before, it's a record of risk, describes each risk. See, there's a risk ID, and we bucketed the risk into so far, the ones we've identified, about 35 or 40 or so, into categories like direct impact on our financials, or regulatory and compliance risk, or reputational risk, or our operational and business continuity risks. Some examples there, for example, the big one on the one ice collapse scenario, which we're going to talk about in the next stress test scenario. The other one being what if a PPA's default, the regulatory compliance risk, one of the risks listed that we're displaying here. This is more developed than what we're sharing right now in a Brown active meeting. And then the COLA requirement, the requirement to hold a large amount of reserves per a CPUC proceeding that's going on. Reputational risk, operational and business continuity risk if you have natural disaster, staff turnover, or a system failure with Calpine, which is a e-billing engine. Okay. Yeah, those are the main components of the framework. I'm happy to take any further questions.
Amrit, thank you so much. Very, firstly, something critical to the functioning of the organization. So to look at a comprehensive organizational level to see the risk assessment and to evaluate it and to plan for it across the organization is very important. It's wonderful to see how stress test analysis done 1 year ago made that not the only focus, but actually a component of this ERM framework that you put together. I also appreciate putting that matrix that you just showed, the last one, specifying, because all those issues we discuss at different board meetings, different items, even just from a policy perspective. Put it all together is very beneficial. Great report. Thank you. Clarifying questions, committee members.
Sure. So you're presenting a framework, and I have a couple of questions on line items, but I don't know if that's appropriate at this point in time. Pardon me?
It's fine.
It's fine. So in your framework, I guess there's one of the risks that we're seeing now is the risk of not meeting the RA requirements, right? So that's included in
it's the risk register, not meeting RA compliance, penalties, MTR obligations.
Okay. And then of course the high price of resource adequacy versus prices dropping, right? Our retail prices dropping.
And that's also in their stress test. The next.
And then the other risk is not being able to procure clean energy. Is that in there?
Stress test register.
Yeah.
Right, but I'm just saying globally, not being able, there's just not enough energy out there that we can buy, and or the competition for it is very high. Okay, so those are all details that are included. Okay.
There are elements of those, and some of those materialize in the price scenario, price assumptions we make, meeting our obligations.
The next item, we'll really get into the detail on it, and we as an agency are going to be looking at it and feeding that back to you for your feedback.
And we'll have more discussions on these items in the risk committee, appropriate for the risk oversight.
So my final question is, this is what SVCE is doing. What are other CCAs doing? Are they doing the same thing? Are we going along in parallel, or are we forging ahead? Kind of where are we with our maturity as an organization relative to the other CCAs?
I think we're on the top decile of maturity and sophistication on this. I think Monica's team and Amrit's team really bring great experience to this enhancement, evolution. And one of the major projects that the board had identified a year and a half, 2 years ago was business process optimization, energy trade risk management. It's just that's what Amrit's leading. So I'd say we're in that top decile.
That's good to hear. Those are my questions.
Thank you. And I love the answer.
Here.
Wonderful. Yvonne, your questions?
I do. Right. Did we, during this process, did we identify anything that we feel we have not appropriately prepared ourselves for? Were there any moments in going through this?
So we're still developing and refining what I presented so far as a framework, but we did do an initial list of our risks, came up with 35 or 40 or so risks. Not so much, I would say. For example, I will admit initially we didn't put banking failure in there, but that incident happened, we added that in there, but we also assessed that the risks were well managed because of the way we had diversified in the strategy between the board. And this is a living document, the risk register that we're going to emphasize throughout the agency, that anyone want to put it in a more public place that anyone can add to the risk register as they're thinking. It's one thing to once sit down and comprehensively fill it out, but it's another thing to have thoughts later on. The idea right now is make sure that it's thought-provoking within the organization, and people can come up and say, oh, we need to add this risk and this risk to that. But overall, I think we have a good handle on our risk, but nevertheless, we need to go through this process in a bit more detail.
Okay, I really appreciate adding all these other not anticipated, but possible risks. Especially I think I've been very surprised to see what's been happening, with the gas ban and how much traction they've gotten with Berkeley, and it's a little bit scary. So I think that that should be, and it is, as I see here, we're talking about regulatory and compliance, but looking at how those factors and the other groups who may be in disagreement, how that can also pose a risk to us being successful with our mission and where we're going.
Thank you. Other questions? Andrea, let's open.
Hands raised.
Close to public comment, anytime. I want to thank you for the magic word, living document.
I would just make a comment. Wasn't really a question. I just want to say I'm extremely impressed. When we started 6 years ago, we were asking for risk management, and we got a bunch of bands in which we were going to hedge, right? Very simple, but we got something in there. And then when Amrit came and did stress testing, I thought, wow, we're really turning it up now. And this is just like continuing to add to the complexity and upping the game to the point that it's almost overwhelming how far we have come from our original sort of simple trying to control our risks, and for some reason our world has gotten more complex. So it's actually more, we needed a lot more than when maybe the bans were appropriate back then. But I definitely appreciate, I'm not sure if it was Amrit when he was hired had this in his head, or he brought in the right members of his team and Monica's team to think this through. But I'm extremely impressed on how complex we've brought the risk management. And I hate to see if it gets any more complex, my brain might explode.
Rob, thank you. And it's good to have the historical perspective. You're the organization from, I think, day one. And that's a good reminder how SVCE is constantly evolving and improving, with the world becoming more and more complex and difficult in a lot of ways for the organization. Team Girish, again, I'll translate Rob's statement and add to that, if that's a motion. I know there's no motion needed. I'll be wholeheartedly seconding the motion. Thank you, Amrit. And thank you, Girish. Thank you, Monica, and the full team. All you do every single day. Thanks. And
Fantastic.
this is discussion, so Rob, perfect timing. This is discussion time. Any other thoughts from you, Rob? Okay, you want? Please go ahead.
I mean, echoing everything that Rob said, this is really impressive. We sit on a lot of different boards. And I've got to tell you, you really hit it out of the ballpark here. It's incredible. And not only is it incredible, but to see the thought that's gone through it and then think through the process that, yeah, those really are, I mean, these are some real risks that we, overlook. And the financial piece, the stress test, I mean, that seemed a little bit more, oh yeah, we should be doing this. But I mean, like Rob said, this is really, it's really forward thinking. So, which is no surprise. You guys are always forward thinking.
Thanks.
Thank you for all that. We have an amazing team. So
Yes, we do.
it's just amazing. And I'll just maybe double click on one thing Amrit said. It's the living document. It's a culture thing, right? So in fact, this afternoon, several folks we're just going to sit down and spend an hour going over risk register. And so the contributions from the owners of every risk, right? So none of people, Monica's team, Amrit's team, admin team, just looking at enterprise-wide. So yeah, we'll keep it going, bring back results to you. And you're going to see a lot more in the next item, so probably.
And please convey our thanks to each and every member of it. Let's take it. Ryan, your thoughts?
I can only echo those, but it's really helpful to hear Rob's perspective because he's been here since day one. And I think there aren't too many employees that have been here since day one. There's a few, but I mean, it's the evolution of the team. So, and I've observed this since virtually day one, but I wasn't on the board or anything. So anyways, that's a good observation, Rob. Thanks.
Thank you. Big thanks to the team and on to the next item from Amrit.
Okay,
which is number
thank you
6.
for all those wonderful comments. Sets me up for this next presentation.
Just don't take any stress. We expect a lot, I know, but you guys will do a great job.
We do stress tests so that we can reduce some stress and sleep better. So the topic today is to present this year's stress test analysis, and we'll go through the construction of the stress test. It will sound somewhat similar to what we did last year, but we're building it to what's a little bit more what we're seeing in the marketplace today. Basically, most likely a pending economic recession. But the reason it's related to last year stress test because those are still the big dollar financial impacts that those risks are still the big ones that can have on us. So we'll talk about the results and what it means for our reserve targets. The numbers I'm going to present right now are illustrative. We will update and refresh these numbers when we do the budget analysis again. Then we'll looking for committee's feedback on the way we should be setting our reserve targets. Right now we have 3 thresholds. We have minimum, target, and max. And the discussion, the question that we're posing to the committee is, should we just have min and max? Because it's not very clear what it means to have a target. Very clear what it means. So minimum or above max of targets. Talk about that. So very similar to a slide I presented before. As I said, we learned a lot from last year's stress test analysis. So some of these the risk scenarios that we're not specifically covering doesn't mean that they're not relevant. It's just that we know that they're not going to be as stressful as the one we're constructing in present today. So we're building off of the main purpose of this slide is that we're building off of the lessons we learned last year and not ignoring those risk drivers on our risk. So this year's stress test, we again, as I mentioned, we're looking at a forward collapse in energy prices to a modeled 1 percentile level. Okay, so energy prices has a big, it's very volatile, and I will share some of the volatility in the upcoming slides. But if, naturally you would think prices increase is going to be bad for us. But remember, we forward hedge a good chunk of our energy purchases. So when prices increase, because of the hedges we have in place, we don't really get the full brunt of that increase portfolio because we've hedged those. But our revenues are also a function of market prices. How is that so? If you remember, we target to keep our rates competitive to P. There are two components to that. Obviously, one is what is PG&E's rates. Market prices affects PG&E's rates. Prices are higher, PG&E's rates tend to be higher. Prices are lower, their rates tend to be lower. But the other bigger component is PCIA. So if prices are higher, PCIA is low. The stranded costs, so-called stranded costs of PG&E's recovering from us, our customers, is lower. If prices are low, they're saying, hey, they need to come to our customers and say, pay for that differential. So PCIA goes up. So that's why I say prices are revenues are function of market prices. So if prices drop, our rates, what we can charge customers, can go down quite a bit, while our energy costs will not necessarily go down because of the hedges we have in place. That's the big reason that this is a big driver to our financial growth. Then we layer in the economic recession. What if we have a load loss or a certain number of periods? What if our customers, our bad debt, our customers' ability to pay their bills, and therefore our uncollectibles? And then the financial liquidity, which was a component of last year's stress test, because this risk is still relevant to us. One is this proceeding that's going on at the PUC called financial reserve security. Right now, we pay very little into this, something in the orders of $157,000 or so. But what some proposals out there are saying, we should be posting 2 months of energy costs, which would be as much as $80 billion. This is a proceeding that's been delayed, but we're expecting a decision somewhere closer to the end of this year. If that were to prevail, that's a significant amount of cash that can be tied up for our liquid funds. So we have modeled not 80 million, but 40 million, because if prices were to drop, then the requirement would go down. And this other risk, the counterparty collateral postings. When we enter into agreements with our counterparties as a means of credit risk management, we require counterparties to post collateral when our risk to them increases, and they require us to post collateral when their risk to us increases. Right? When prices basically goes down, they want to make sure that we can still willing to pay the high prices that they signed up if they were high. So then that could put a financial stress on the organization with the amount of cash. So we want to model that we have the liquidity to withstand that price collapse scenario as well. That's part of the stress test. Go to the next one. So here I'm showing prices. We have modeled statistically what prices would look like at a 1% time level. So basically, we do a statistical modeling based on the volatility we're seeing in the marketplace today. We create a distribution of prices. So let's take it to the 1 percentile level, which is on a model basis. We're saying there's one. So mathematically, what it says is, there's 1% chance prices could be lower than this. But as the chart here shows, you can see the sharp trajectory of the prices. Very similar to trends in the past, and I'll show that in the next slide. You can see the prices have gone up significantly, and the stress level prices that we're modeling, prices coming down to, we're actually the 50th percentile, or the expected prices, where prices were basically in inferior months as 15 to 18 months. So you can see, while you can say this is an extreme scenario going to the 1 percentile level, but it's very plausible. Disruption in the marketplace, if we were to go into an economic recession, demand for energy goes down, prices could come tumbling down as they did. That's what we're. Happy to take questions along the way. Next slide.
So going back to what you said previously about the having to put in a deposit, the 80 million that you modeled at 40 million, who would we pay that to?
So this would go to the provider of last resort, which right now is the PG&E for us. So they would hold this as a letter of credit. If we were to go bankrupt, they could draw on.
So does that come out of our, how do we pay for that? Is it just a line of credit that is against our investments, or is it?
We could pay in cash and say we're going to post 80 million in cash. That's a financial decision. Or we can issue a letter of credit, but it still squeezes the liquidity out, and the bank will require a substantial amount of collateral against that.
Against a letter of credit. I mean, if we're getting, what's our rate of return on our investment portfolio now? Rough numbers.
About 4.5% or so.
I used 4%, so 80 million at 4%, that's 3.2 a year.
Yeah,
that's a big number.
And the line of credit, if we were to post that as cash, they have, you have to pay maintenance fee.
Oh,
and if they pull on it, it's LIBOR plus 200 basis points.
and that's going to PG.
Well, that's a proceeding. So we are actively participating and obviously advocating against, hoping this scenario doesn't materialize, but we want to be positioned where.
But it's a risk.
Very credible risk.
Sorry, I didn't mean to sort of veer off, but
this is good.
that's, I get that one.
Rob, go ahead, please.
I was going to say it's one that I've always worried about also, and I'm hoping that they will find a way to do it less disruptively, because it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? They're trying to, if somebody goes bankrupt, yeah, okay, the provider of last resort is going to need some money to service the customers. But on the other hand, if you're tying up $80 million, that's money that's not working. And it's, if you're a more marginal CCA, that could be the difference of being able to survive or not. So we've been talking about that for a while. I'm surprised they haven't made a decision yet, but maybe that's a good thing. Anyway, so I'm glad to hear that we're continuing to participate and try to find a way that it is not such a self-fulfilling prophecy.
So this is a proceeding that's going on. Citlali knows more about this, but this aspect of the reserve climate posting has shifted to phase 2. Right now, what they're implementing in this phase is financial monitoring. Whether CCAs are required to report to the energy division. For example, if your days cash on hand drops below 45, some other financial metrics. So that's where the discussion is right now. This aspect is delayed to the next phase.
Rob, thank you for making that point. Couldn't have been better. Okay, Amrit.
So here I'm showing historical prices. You can see the type of scenarios we're modeling. When we call it extreme, why we call it pause. You look at this, you can see the commodity. This is natural gas. If I were to layer prior prices, they would be sitting right on top of that because natural gas on the market, prices for power. You can see all the boom and bust cycles. Look at the financial crisis, from the peak to the bottom, it's approximately a 20% drop. And in our model stress case, drop to the, when we go to the 1 percentile level from the current level, it's a 44% drop. So while it may be extreme, but very plausible scenario. So that's the point of this slide. Okay, so here we get into some numbers, and I'm not showing the base case number. I do reference it, but it's in the appendix slides. The base case shows if prices continue the trend that they're continuing, where we're seeing the forward market trade energy at right now, if we model them at that with some assumptions for RA that we've made. That's not a fairly liquid market, as favorable as energy prices. So that's on the model basis with some feedback from our consultants we use. See that our base case show us improving significantly in the next 5-year trajectory. We can go from a reserve level end of the fiscal year of 2023 from 219 into something like close to 400 million. So that's very good, and we can see strong growth in margins over the 5 years. It comes with strong caveats, PCIA, PG&E generate assumptions, how we've modeled it, how we model PCIA using the Newgen consulting models. Still a black box to us PCIA because PG&E doesn't reveal the portfolio, so we do the best we can with the public information. It's a fairly good model that we use. The main thing, I don't want to emphasize on the absolute value of these forecasted base case scenario levels, right? But I'm more interested in the delta between using the same set of prices to model the stress conditions on, the delta between the base case and the stress test level results. And what that shows is that if the stress test scenario were to occur as we model them, we would have a drawdown to maintain our competitive position, a drawdown of 185 million from our reserves. So in other words, at the end of the fiscal year 23, we could go down to $39 million in reserves, where we're sitting somewhere around 200 million. And the numbers at the bottom here shows what the days cash on hand. This is our metric, days cash on hand. And it's pretty much similar to the reserve levels because our burn rate is about $1 billion. So think of that as 157 days of cash on hand, 157 million reserves. So if the stress test were to happen, from a days cash on hand, we're sitting somewhere around 195 days right now. By end of 2024, we can go down to 157 days. And by end of 2025, 41 days. And the latter 3 years of the 5-year horizon, we will actually go below, we will run out of cash. By the numbers, honestly, that 1-to-1 relationship. So that's what the stress test is showing. If the stress would happen, we would fall below our minimum target of 120 days. But what we're trying to do is back solve for that number in the next slide. So the new targets, and these are illustrative right now. Let's back solve for that number. What would we want to end our reserves at? Have our reserve levels be such that if the scenario were to occur over the next 2 years, we don't go below 120 days, stress test were to happen, and over the 5-year horizon, 90 days. It says if we were to have about 270 million, look, if I were to just look at 2 fiscal years of stress tests not going below 120 days, we would need to have 270 days. About $270 million reserves. We're sitting somewhere around 200 right now, so it says build to that. But if you want to manage risk to the 5-year horizon that we talked about, we're making sure that in any of those years we don't fall below 90 days. It's like we should be targeting 390 million, where we are right now at around 200. Okay. So this is the methodology we kind of came up with last year of updating our reserve policy. And this is what we would do. We would refresh the same stress test analysis when we do the budget and send it to the finance committee and the board is preliminary budget in August. We'll update these using the prices we'll use to the budget, so it's consistent with those same model set of prices. But these numbers will change slightly, probably not that much during the big movements on market prices. So that's the stress test. And before I get into the discussion item, any questions what these numbers mean and how we can.
I have a clarifying question. So the 80 million that you were talking about earlier, that Brian, is that included when the slide you were showing years straight?
Yes.
So that's part of it.
So the drawdown in reserves, we modeled it at 40, not 80 billion. The assumption being prices were lower. That requirement would be low.
Clarifying questions? Any members?
We'll go to the next discussion item, which is should we get rid of the middle there, the target? What does target mean? You know, right now, our reserve policy says if we fall below 120, take certain actions to get up to the middle. If we go above the maximum, take actions, present a strategy to the board, and what to do with that level of cash. But target, there's no action by it. Would it be cleaner to have a policy that just has a minimum? That's a question item, discussion item. So that we can engage in discussion and take.
I'm going to open. If someone. Chair George has some.
Don't see any hands raised. Board Chair Tyson, if you would like to say anything, I can unmute you. I don't think so.
Okay. Close the public comment period. I see Rob's hand raised and Yvonne's. That's the order I'm seeing. I don't know if it was the other way. Are you okay? Okay, thanks, Yvonne. Rob, let's start with you.
So, the first thing that comes to mind is, yes, we need to plan for the right amount of reserve, but because we've gone through, the complicated stress tests, I think we can see the problem coming further out in the future. And Silicon Valley Bank is a good example. If they had been doing stress tests and realized how catastrophic an interest rate rise could be, they could have early on, because it was clear that interest rates are going to be risen, right? That the Fed said so. Before they got out of control, they could have started changing out their long-term bonds for short-term bonds and not taking it as badly. And it seems to me we can do the same kinds of things. Instead of saying, it's coming, let's just take it in the shorts. We start, so there's some delay to it. For example, if prices drop quickly this year, we know we're going to get hit hard next year by PCIA, for example. So we could change, for example, our rates from, instead of being 4% below, switch it to 1% below or something like that. If we see this strong case coming at us. So I guess the question is, when do we take that to the next level? Not just build the reserve, but be ready to actually start suggesting some possible moves when we see it coming.
Yes, that's a very good point. It's actually factored in our thinking, and that's part of the ERM framework. As we see these elements, we're not going to wait. You see, prices can drop very quickly. In the 2008 financial crisis, bulk of that drop happened within 3 months. I remember being in a position in a company where $2 billion in cash went out, lateral postings to counterparties. From a mark to market, there used to be positive $4 million swing.
And so for us, something like watching for the end to the the Ukrainian war could be a quick drop in natural gas prices, right?
It could happen very quickly. So we want reserve.
Watching for triggers like that.
Absolutely. So we want reserves to be adequate, but at the same time, we are not going to sit back and say, let's wait till the reserve is drawn down. We're going to take actions. We're going to come to the board and say, let's change our rates. You know, we're going to start going to the banks and saying, can we get a line of credit? Right now, we're not maintaining a line of credit. We want to take on that cost, but we would start negotiating upfront on those terms. So there are actions we would take. And as a healthy organization, we have to monitor risk on a daily basis. You know, the risk we present to the risk oversight committee, we actually do it on a weekly basis, monitoring of those type of risks.
Okay, those were my thoughts. So
Thanks, Rob. Right,
Is,
you want to go first? Go ahead.
Sure, thanks. I think definitely we'll be able to identify a lot of upcoming factors with this. Again, this is fantastic and so informative, not just to see in a snapshot, but really to start to create the policy. So, I wonder, as you're talking about, do we want to have maximums? Do we want to have minimums? Those things, looking at what might change with the war, looking at what might happen legislation wise, looking at the interest rates. I mean, those are all, trying to be and not be reactive. But I guess, Amrit, I'm wondering, now that you've looked at this and you've kind of laid out for us, where we would have shortfalls for those 4 years. Would this not also be informative to set a more realistic and healthy maximum or minimum, so that, you could set that, and then maybe we have a series of policy triggers. If we see something coming, then, the discount to customers is less. We're doing less community spending, wherever it is that we need to tighten, but we've listed out what our first steps would be to look at. Because what I hear you saying is, do we, and it's relevant, do we need to have a maximum? Do we need to have a minimum? Should we just kind of go from the stress test? But I almost feel like that is also that maybe we should be doing both. Maybe we should have a maximum and a minimum, and having the stress test dictate how we move along.
I want to clarify, maybe it was confusing the way I was the discussion item. I'm not going to eliminate minimum maximum, definitely keep minimum and maximum.
Okay.
So the question is, do we get rid of the middle layer? It's just that as a policy level, what actions do you take? What does target mean? It doesn't have much definition. Yeah, definitely we will have minimum and we will have maximum based on the methodology we just discussed. So the discussion is, when everyone, this public document, what people would come to us and say, you've gone above your target. What does that mean to us? It's still a risk. We want to be planned a little bit, not just a 2-year horizon and to a 5-year horizon. For that, we've defined a maximum. So right now, the policy says take no action between min and max.
Or
we can take that out and say there's pretty specific action items if we were to fall below minimum, or if you were to go above max.
Mm-hmm. And so then I guess it would be going off of that, maybe the stress test does that bring up the target if we do a middle? I mean, I see what you're saying. Do we take that out altogether? But then if we're doing minimum and maximum, it just seems like we can't solve for everything, right? And there's so many factors that we also don't know. So I guess I'm wondering if we just use the stress test to set a target that is more towards the max. That's what I'm wondering.
Maybe this is perfect. We want to hear from you like this, and not necessarily make a decision now. It's really getting your input. Like I said, we're going to meet this afternoon. We're going to continue to chew on this. we know we need to make some changes over here, so I think it's very good input. We'll take it and get back to you.
Great.
You want other thoughts?
If I could continue on that,
Go
thing.
ahead, Rob. Right? Just hold on, Rob.
I do like the idea of having actions we take when we hit the maximum or the minimum. If we hit the maximum, unless we do some more stress tests and says our world is getting even more risky, to me, it says something like we should drop our rates and we should put more money immediately into programs, for example. We should do something to draw it below the maximum. That's the maximum is really saying, we don't need this money. We should put it to work, either in lower rates or programs, or whatever other item is that's useful. But just holding on to it now sort of becomes irresponsible if we have too much of it. And the same thing for the minimum says, we're in danger. If we're below the minimum, we need to make a first priority to somehow fill this. Maybe second priority just below keeping rates below PG&E, for example. But it may be ahead of other things. We may write a policy like that. For me, you suggested getting rid of the target, and it's more about the people that are managing this are professionals. So I worry about it less than, say, board members that kind of come and go and say, oh, well, we're over the minimum, we don't have a target, we're good, let's stop filling. Well, what if we're just barely over the minimum, and then we could easily drop below it in some year where we had a 2 years ago where we took 30 million out of our reserves. So the target helps, I think, the non-professionals that guide you in thinking about, yes, we should be putting a little more because we are towards the target, or we're over the target. So, we can maybe not put so much in. So in my mind, for the non-professionals, I think a target helps them think about when they're voting yes or no for, suggested staff directions, that affect our reserves.
Rob, thank you. Brian, hold on just 1 second. I want to respond to that. Rob, you put it very well. There is a board meeting happening once a month. And as Amrit pointed out, something can shift very quickly. And so it's the pace of the board meeting, the non-professionals, as you put us, Rob, I completely and wholeheartedly agree with you. And the team here is managing the stresses and the risks on a weekly, I heard from you, and some things on a daily basis. With the level of volatility and the nimbleness that is required to deal with all of this, Rob, am I hearing from you that some of these could be very discrete, quantifiable actions? At this point, we take this, and some could be left in a more subjective, more qualitative kind of actions, again, where the professionals know what they're doing and then they come to the board for specific things. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think the most obvious one is each year we set rates, right? And if we, for some reason, are near our minimum, this is where I worry more than the maximum. We're near the minimum, and board members, we get a group of board members that, well, it's a recession. We really need to help out our customers. We need a 10% below PG&E rates kind of thing. And they can say, well, we're above our minimum. We don't need to keep building reserves, even though staff says, well, we are a little bit in the danger area. I still think that the idea of a target helps the non-professionals think through, this is really where we're trying to go. We're not trying to just get over minimum. When we're thinking about things like, say, setting rates, for example.
Thank you.
That's a very good feedback, Rob. Thank you for sharing that, because that helps us understand how these numbers are being perceived. And that's the feedback.
Thank you for your patience.
So what we've got is a question, staff is wondering, do we eliminate the target. And what's the downside of keeping the target? That's my first question. And what I heard you saying is it doesn't provide that much direction to staff per se. Am I hearing that correctly?
You know, one is to staff, but more importantly, what does it mean to the board and to the public?
Okay.
We got Rob's perspective, that was very good, is, okay, you've reached your target. What's this next for? So it's helpful to understand.
So building on Rob's point, if you go back to your risk matrix where you had red, yellow, green, I see a green band somewhere in this, I don't know if it's in the center or a little higher or a little lower. And I see it kind of going yellow. And then I see when you're at when you're over, it's red. It's kind of like too late. So that's the value that I see in having a target. And whereas, oh, we're over the minimum, that's okay. You know, well, if you're just barely over, you're still in the, you know, how bright is that orange or yellow? So I guess I'm merely reinforcing what Rob was saying. And that's the value, because people can then say, oh, okay, I got it. Not an issue.
Brian, very well put. I like your connecting this with the prior item. That's what it is, a component of that, and using the traffic signal colors, because that gives more a range and a visual sense, especially to the board members, as Rob pointed out. And that way staff can present it to the board and the board members changing. I think that helps a lot, especially with the nuances at a certain point. Just tipping below the green may be okay, but then staff is aware of what's coming, what else they are looking around, what are the other factors, the 35 to 40 list that you mentioned earlier, which is again a living document. And so I think all of that adds up together, the levels of complexity. I keep on using that word, this industry is so complex.
I may just pick off again, it's double clicking on what you all said, what Rob said. Actually, Adam and Pam and Amrit already started working on like a one-pager to explain why we need reserves in a very simple manner. You know, so to get this, because otherwise if you see the literal meaning of minimum, hey, you're above minimum, that's okay, right? Or why are you at maximum? So it is a challenge to do that, but that's kind of what we're looking at. And words matter. Some of the, so that's one, and then it's the time frame we're looking at. What's going on in the first couple of years? What may go on in the next 5 years? So pulling that together into a bumper sticker is difficult, but I'm gonna try. What's that elevator pitch? And what you're seeing today, which is a lot more complex and detailed. Still very useful input on exactly like what Amrit said, how you as an elected official are perceiving it and reflecting how members of the community or other council members may be perceiving it. This will help us developing both the vocabulary and quote unquote targets.
Thank you, Girish. That does remind me, we have had some conversations. I have been asked, why is SVCE in such a humongous amount of reserve? Serving the public was the implication behind that. And, you know, I believe in communication. So that one-page document that you mentioned, I think that will go a long way. It helps us, the very politely just said we are the elected officials. I will repeat what Rob said, we are the non-professional. And that is very important for us. We know what is coming. It's not simple finance. So much more in this industry, how to stay afloat while meeting our both the missions and is important. Any other thoughts, Yvonne?
Yeah, I just to share, with staff, I think it would also be a good idea to maybe do some more education if we can, if there's an opportunity on the volatility of this business and talking about it so that customers and elected officials, both on and off the board, understand, really the reality of what we're dealing with. And we're not a PG&E, right? So I don't think the government's going to bail us out, but just really so that they understand what you're dealing with and why there are these massive reserves. And it doesn't really look like, a hoarding of a public entity and monies. When you look at a city budget, when you look at this, there's a real disparity there. So I think the education piece of it would be really important to just be sure that we continue to do.
Thanks, Yvonne. It's like saying we do know there is a CCA that does not exist anymore. Challenges. That is reality. Have to be. Okay, more thoughts, or should we move along? I don't want to rush anyone. We are at 11:47. We still have one more agenda item. If somebody, I don't want to cut anyone off. Are we ready? It's the most important item, the one we are wrapping up, number 6. So are we good?
We do have
Completely agree. Are we good?
it looks like Board Chair Tyson has his hand raised in public comment if you would like to reopen.
Absolutely, I'd love to reopen public comment. Board Chair Tyson, we would love to hear your pearls of wisdom and advice.
Right. Board Chair, if you are there, we have unmuted you. Board Chair. Unfortunately, oh, there we go. We see you. Can you say something, please? Unfortunately, we're not able to hear you. I apologize. Yeah, we're not able to hear you. He's unmuted currently. I see that you're unmuted, Chair, but unfortunately, we're not able to hear you.
Is there another?
Why don't we go on to the next one, and if he
Can we
comes
take his
back,
thoughts
we can
later?
hear him at the end of
Is that
the
okay?
meeting.
Yes.
Okay. Moving on to item number 7, the program's snapshot. Expanding charging incentives to new affordable housing. And this is an information only item presented by Nupur Hiramat, Manager of Community Programs, and Stefan, Senior Program Specialist.
She will be on Zoom.
Okay, wonderful, Nupur.
So just as a reminder, we've been trying to bring these program snapshots to the executive committee to give you a flavor of what your communities are seeing by way of decarbonization programs. As well as we wanted to share some of the insights that we are gaining as we are making decisions around program design, particularly if there's been a gap since we brought this program to you for initial approval. So with that, I'll turn it to Hannah, our senior program specialist, and she'll talk about this program.
Great, thank you, Nupur, and good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to be here today to present this month's program snapshot and share some key details with you about one of our newest incentive programs that is funding EV charging at new construction affordable housing developments. Next slide. Okay, great. So about 2 months ago, we opened up applications for new construction affordable housing developers to be able to easily apply and reserve funding for EV charging equipment that they're installing above state code minimums. And as you may remember, when the board approved this program back in August of last year, This program was somewhat envisioned as a companion to last year's REACH code efforts to make sure that gap funding is available for affordable developments to help meet those higher REACH code standards, but also not incur additional cost burdens while doing so. It very much aligns with our mission to expand EV charging access for our lower income residents, and it also helps to future-proof these sites for growing EV adoption levels in our area. Another bonus is that this incentive helps to maximize home charging ports during their most cost-effective installation point, which is during the construction process. And so to support this effort, the board approved a total of $7.5 million towards these installations. And next slide. So as Nipur mentioned, we kind of wanted to talk about some of the design decisions. And so, during the design process, we made a couple of adjustments to eligibility, really to help maximize the number of eligible properties and hopefully, help get funds out the door faster and really more charging ports installed. And so as such, the eligible sites now include new construction affordable housing sites built to REACH code standards, whether it's entitled under a 2019 or a 2022 REACH code. But really any affordable new development in our territory that's building to exceed Calgary minimums would be eligible. Again, we're really aiming to cover those additional costs that it would take to go above and beyond the state code minimums. And from the applicant perspective, we integrated this incentive into our existing multifamily EV charging program, which already had incentives for existing multifamily buildings as well. And this helps to simplify the process and provide one website for multifamily EV charging incentives, both for new construction as well as existing building retrofit projects. And the next slide. So the program is now live. Applications are open. This is the link to our program page with more details, as well as the online application form. We've been spreading the word out to your city housing, planning, building staff, developers in the region, but keep this in mind for any new construction affordable developments planned in your jurisdiction. I think they'd probably be eligible candidates for this program, and we'd love to help make it happen. So that's the end of my presentation, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Hannah. Yohan has.
Thank you, Hannah. That's excellent. I'm just wondering, what are the requirements for affordable? Is it 100% affordable? Do they just 80%? What is that threshold?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we are defining affordable. It is like deed restricted affordable. So that will be basically as determined by local, regional kind of mandates on how it's funded, how it's set up. But we're mainly targeting very low and low income housing. And so that I think is about 80% of area media income or below housing units. So, and it does not have to be 100% affordable development. So we are allowing developers to apply for if there's, mixed market rate and affordable, we're allowing those developers to apply for the units that do meet the standard and for the EV infrastructure that would support those units.
So if they've got 49 units and 10 are affordable, then you would be supporting those 10 units.
Correct.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Yohan. Rob?
My question is, are you aware of Eden Housing and have you tried to work with them directly?
Yes, actually, Eden Housing were some of our first outreach folks that we spoke to in the design process of this. We spoke to 2 folks from Eden Housing to make sure that this program would work for the affordable housing development community.
Because in Los Gatos, we just finished building 49 very low income units that Eden Housing basically is going to manage, but I don't think they've put any EV charging infrastructure in, but we just got a pre-application for another 460 units, of which 80 some are going to be an Eden Housing building again, where this would be extremely appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds right up this program's alley. We'll definitely make sure that the folks at Eden Housing are aware. We've been in contact with them, but it's nice to know about that project in particular. We can make sure and follow up.
Thank you, Hannah.
Yes, I picked up on your point where you said it's the most cost-effective part of the construction timeline to do it up front. And I'm not familiar enough with what the requirements are, but is this to do the pre-wiring, or is this to put the actual charging stations in? Could you give us a little insight into?
Yeah, absolutely. So it sort of depends on the exact reach code standards that are adopted by the jurisdiction, but in our model code, which I think is what majority of our jurisdictions adopted for 2022, it requires actual places to either plug in if it's an outlet or actual ports. So it's not just the wiring, it has to be what we call, or basically EV ready. So somebody could come up and charge day one.
Right. So I think you can move the needle a lot further, faster at a lower cost if you're pre-wiring for it and anticipating it, but not putting in all the associated hardware and infrastructure. The finishing off is more a function of, to me, you know, making that investment has a certain value, but pushing it over the edge is what takes more dollars. I'm just wondering if your program dollars could go further and you could put more charging infrastructure readiness in place. Anyways, those are just my kind of observations. But I think it's excellent program.
Thanks, and I'll just add, the reach code efforts that we have adopted, and also in partnership with other CCAs like PCE, for the new construction, they actually are advocating for 100% access. So every single parking spot having some sort of place to charge, whether it's a lower power outlet receptacle or potentially shared use level 2s. It sort of depends on the building, depends on the code, but these codes are helping to push for 100% access at day one upon construction. And in terms of the costs, it is definitely the cheapest to do that during the construction process versus having to do a retrofit after.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for bringing up that very useful point. It's something slightly different example, but in Saratoga, that's what we did. Other things were upfront during construction. It's much cheaper, of course, rather than retro. So extending the dollars as far as we could, decided to pre-wire and can't afford the rest, so we'll do our affordable housing, different scenario. But it's always good for board members to bring our perspective how we are dealing with issues, and for staff to see other ways of where we are working with project owners forward, and that keeps us focused on our mission. Thank you, Hannah. Any other thoughts? I don't remember opening for. Okay, let's open for the public comment.
We still see a board chair Tyson's hand raised. I'm going to try again. Board chair, I am asking you to unmute at this time if you would like to make a comment either on this item or with approval from the chair, of course, from the last item. And that looks like he's not coming through.
Technical problems. He must not be in California, I guess. We have better technology in California. Would love to hear from you, George. You mind?
Sorry, I wasn't muted. I just said I love your comment. He must not be in California.
Thanks, Yvonne. Okay, with that, let's move on to the committee staff remarks. We are just at noon, and let's see if we can wrap up. Any remarks from committee members? Was it your hand raised, Rob? Okay. George, I think we have tried. Any remarks from staff?
Just a reminder and encouragement, if you would like to join us at the CalCCA annual meeting, several of you are signed up, that's great. We also have the ribbon cutting for Casa Diablo 4 and Mammoth in early June. That invite has been sent out to you. Please do respond. It's an overnight, even do a day trip. The first geothermal plant that has been built in California in the last 30 years. So kudos to GoPro to getting that project. It's a joint 3C and SVCE project. So we'd love to have members attend. Right now, we just have one signed up.
What was the date in June?
I believe it's June 9th,
That's a Friday.
correct?
I might be able to do that, actually.
Great, we'll follow up with you. Thank you. That's okay. That's all, Chair.
Okay, with that, motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Thank you. I second that. I adjourn the meeting at 12:02. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.